Dramatic. Just have to do it for a second. So we wanted to say welcome to everyone to Moses Brown campus and a collaborative event with the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance New England chapter. I'm Rachel Littman. I'm one of the co-chairs. Craig Biden is here with me. He's on the other side of the table, but we'll get him on. We just wanted to say welcome and thank you for coming. And before we get started, we will observe what is common in Quaker meetings is to observe a moment of silence. So let's just have a moment of silence, please. Okay, thank you. I will turn the camera and mic over to our colleague Don McNamara. When I sent the invitation out, I think there was a link to his bio, so hopefully we don't have to spend too much time unless there's something relevant we've met that you wish to call to again, but otherwise I'll let you talk through a little bit of what's Quakerism for those who may not know. We're hoping to broadcast this and send it out to our Yale alumni from a lot of different people who are involved in social impact space. As we mentioned, either for directly in nonprofits or as Craig represents, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in the private sector. So to the extent there's anything that's useful for that, we might have some attendees or people listening later. So I will leave it over to you. And Don, thank you very much for coming.
Good. Thanks, Rachel. I'm delighted to be here this evening and to have a chance to talk about Quaker decision-making and how it might be relevant to non-Quaker settings, and can you use it in business? Now, I don't want to keep people in suspense, so I will tell you at the start that I think it can be used in non-Quaker settings and can be used effectively and produce better decisions as we go along. So,
we're recording, so you can welcome.
Betsy, welcome. Good to see you. Okay. So we were just starting on.
Sorry, I'm late. No, it's fine.
Not at all. Here. So that basically Quaker decision making is based on people coming together around a sense of the meeting that produces the decision. And sometimes it's called consensus. Quakers tend to use sense of the meeting, which has a little more spiritual element to it, but it is indeed people coming together and agreeing on the decision. And so there's not voting. There aren't winners and losers in the process. And I think that's what's unique and special about that. So I wanted to say just a bit about my Quaker background and my use of Quaker procedure in my career, and then talk a bit about Quakers and how this procedure sort of grew out of their religious movement, and then talk about a few cases of Quaker decision making, and then comment on how it relates to the non-Quaker setting. We have folks here who've had experience with Quaker procedure, and we'll allow plenty of time for questions or discussion or comment or look. I grew up in Wilmington, Ohio, which is in southwestern Ohio. And there are a lot of Quakers in Clinton County. And the reason was that Quakers came to New England, and then they went to North Carolina to farmland, and then they had outlawed slavery among Quakers by 1750, 100 years before the Civil War. And so the folks living in North Carolina did not have slaves themselves, but they were surrounded by slavery and laws that reinforced it and expectations that you would capture slaves and so on. So many Quakers left North Carolina, and the territory that was open was the Northwest Territory, which was a free territory, no slaves, and became Ohio and Indiana. And so southern Ohio has a lot of Quaker farmers in that area. So in the town that I grew up in, the mayor was Quaker, 2 of the 5 city council members were Quaker, the college was Quaker, and the 3 big churches downtown were the Friends Meeting, the Catholic Church, and the Methodists. So I grew up thinking the major religions of the world were Catholicism, Methodists, and Quakers. And it was only when I moved somewhere else that I discovered that today in the world there are about 400,000 Quakers, less than 500,000 Quakers, and about 76,000 in the United States. And there are 1.2 billion Catholics in the world. So the Quakers are a small group in terms of numbers, and yet they've had a significant impact on education with schools like Swarthmore and Haverford, Bryn Mawr, Earlham, Guilford, Whittier, a range of schools. Secondary schools like Moses Brown, where we're hosted here this evening. So the Quakers have had an impact in that way. And their procedures have been sort of taken on by others and considered and used. And so that's what I wanted to focus on tonight, was this decision-making process and how it can be used. Now, the Quaker procedure grows out of the religion, which the basic idea is that there's that of God in everyone, and Quakers sometimes talk about it as the inner light, and it's led to many of them being pacifists, the feeling that there's that of God in everyone, and you can't solve problems by killing each other and so on. But there's that sense of uniqueness and specialness for each individual, I think, carries over into the decision process, where you're saying we should listen to everybody, and everybody should have an opportunity to contribute to the decision. Now, the Quakers, when they started out, were a radical group. They were, as part of the Protestant Reformation, but George Fox, who founded it in 1648, and his idea was that people could have a direct relationship with God, that God was present and you could seek to connect with God, and that was a relationship you could have, and you didn't need a priest or a bishop or a pope to help you with that relationship. And their form of worship was to meet in silence and wait for someone to be inspired by the Lord to bring a message. And you were supposed to prepare by reading scriptures and praying regularly, but the worship was a group of Quakers gathering in silence, and then people rising and speaking, bringing messages that way. Their official name were the Religious Society of Friends, and they were derided by saying, oh, when they worship, they get so carried away that they quake. And so it was sort of thrown at them as a negative, but they embraced it, and most Friends refer to themselves as Quakers rather than Friends much of the time. And they were focused on equality, and they got in trouble for not taking their hat off for the nobility, because they said we're all equal. They refused to swear oaths. They said, if I go into court and raise my hand and say, today I'm going to tell the truth, that implies that I didn't tell the truth yesterday, and I probably won't tell it tomorrow. And I, as a Quaker, am living my faith in my daily life, and being honest and telling the truth is part of that life, and so I won't swear an oath. And the laws in the U.S. allow that your Quakers can say, I affirm. I won't swear that I'm telling the truth, but I affirm that I'm going to be honest. And so there's an exception there. And there's also a provision for conscientious objection. If for religious grounds you can't serve in the Army, then you can do alternative service. And so ideas that when the Quakers first had them were very anti-society have been accommodated and respected in that way. They
started.
okay. Because of this, they weren't allowed to go to university. They were a radical group, and they couldn't study to be a doctor or study to be a lawyer. And so, as an alternative, a number of them went into business, and it turned out, and they brought their faith with them into the business. And the saying was that you could send, at a time when people bartered over prices, Quakers had a set price and said, this is what it will cost everybody to buy my buttons or cloth or whatever I'm selling. And the saying was you could send a child to buy from a Quaker merchant because they wouldn't take advantage of their inexperience. And it turns out, as the Industrial Revolution was happening and as banking was developing and so on, trust and integrity was a real plus in terms of dealing in these businesses. And so Quakers turned out to be quite successful in terms of this business. And I mean, some of the names are Cadbury Chocolate was a famous Quaker who not only made good chocolate, but also had ideas about a village of workers, housing, and sort of as we look back on it, it was quite paternalistic, but it was concerned about the workers' status at a time when workers weren't treated or honored in that way.
It still exists today.
Yeah. So, and then Barclays Bank that's a Quaker family, and Wharton, who developed the steel industry and endowed the business school at Penn, was a Quaker, and so there were many Quakers who went into business here. Now, Quaker Oats has nothing to do with Quakers, and yet they hit on this idea that the image of a Quaker was one of integrity and honesty, and that would sell oatmeal. And so they've been madly selling oatmeal ever since. Yeah. And those of us who've led Quaker institutions have gone to them and said, don't you feel a little guilty about using the name? Wouldn't you like to donate to Guilford College?
There you go.
And they've gotten very good at resisting that. But it was a symbol of sort of what how how Quakers were respected for their honesty and integrity, and of course they many of them were active in the abolition movement, and they helped with the Underground Railroad and tried to assist people in those situations. And Moses Brown himself, the founder of this school, was a convert, a convinced friend, became a friend, and became active in the abolition movement, and founded this school, which was an important beginning and effort here as well. So the religion itself focused on this individual connection to God, and people talked about that connection, and that got carried over into the business practice as well. When we come to the business practice, it really is thought of as an effort to discern the truth. There's a concept that there's a good answer out there that the Lord is helping you discover and find. and that in your meeting process, you want to try to search for that and seek for that as well. So a typical meeting, and please add as you have thoughts here. We've all been to many of these. A typical meeting would begin with a silence, and it would be a period to center down, to sort of say, you know, I'm going to focus on the group I'm part of. I'm focusing on the issues that we have before us this evening. I'm focusing on my responsibility as a trustee of the school, and I'm focusing on how do I decide in ways that carry forward the Quaker traditions of Moses Brown, if that's it. And the Moses Brown Board does use Quaker procedure and does follow this. So in that silence at the beginning, I personally see it as a time to sort of bring people into the task of the evening, and also in the religious setting to say, you know, I want to be open to hearing if there's a divine leading. I want to be open to hear that and to be part of it. So that silence is an important part of the process. And silence can also be used in the midst of the meeting. If there's a difficult matter, and we try not to go there, but sometimes
I think we could use it more often than it is invoked.
Yeah. You know,
I found.
I've been in meetings that were, I mean, it was around racism, and people were very intense, and the clerk just said, I think we need to gather in silence, and, you know, sort of everything, you know, slowed down, and people came back to the task in a much more positive way. So don't underestimate the value of silence.
And how long might that go on for, like that? Like that?
In the beginning, you don't want it too short. If you say, you know, we're going to have a moment of silence, and if you keep it to a moment, less than half a minute, then it doesn't feel real. It feels like we didn't really have time to focus. But, you know, 2 or 3 minutes would be long enough to...
And it really feels like a long time, even though it is. I mean, even 30 seconds can feel long when people aren't used to it.
And I think another important element of it is that it is a productive time. It's not a time of reflection, but not a time of sadness or sorrow. So that often at a football game, there will be a moment of silence for some particular calamity. But this is an entirely different use of it. And it is, you know, it can be joyful as people are respecting the silence.
One of the ways that I often use it in committee meetings in non-Quaker settings is, first I do ask people to wait to be recognized if they want to speak, but you take a little time in recognizing them. And sometimes I use other steps of the process, which you'll talk about, to just slow things down a little bit and give, sometimes even just space, gives people a feeling of not rising up and, you know, getting tighter and tighter about an issue.
So that helps, I think, in some good ways. The second thing is everybody's equal, and I mean that's you know, so often you go into a meeting and you say, well, you know, I better be quiet. I'm not quite sure where my boss is on this, and I'm going to defer to him or her. The Quaker thing takes all that away. I mean, the idea is that God could share some wisdom with the lowliest employee of the organization as well as the leader of the group. So it creates a sense that everybody's part of this decision, and we're moving in that
And
way.
actually has a responsibility to be part of it too.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you're seeking unity. You want people to come together, and you want to be able to do this. Now, the clerk is very important here, and some people learn to be good clerks. Some people becomes naturally to. Some people are gifted, and some people work at it, but the clerk is terribly important because they're helping set the tone. How long's the silence? Do they call on people? Do they leave a little space between the comments? They're doing it, and they're not to be expressing views or taking this, but they're supposed to be sort of following the thing, and at some point you hope that the clerk would be able to say, I'd like to try a sense of the meeting, and they would say, I've been listening to this very carefully, and I think maybe this is where we're together. This is what we're sharing. This is what the unity's about. And they articulate the sense of the meeting, and then a good clerk will also be sure to have the recording clerk write it down and read it back to the group, and the group, would say, yes, we think that you have successfully captured the sense of the meeting, and we're supportive of that. Now, occasionally someone will say, "I just can't go along with that," or I'm not there yet," or so on. And it's not at all unusual for a matter of business to be carried over to the next meeting and say, "We're not in unity about this. We need to consider it further, and we'll come back to it in the future." Now, sometimes friends will say, "I'm not excited about this, but I will stand aside." And what that means is, I can live with it, but I'm not excited about it, and I'm not going to hold it up. There are a lot of people that are in unity about this, and I'm going to stand aside. Now, if someone says, it's a matter of principle, and I think that we cannot take this action, then the clerk has to weigh that, and usually a clerk would bend over backwards to respect that opinion and would say, we need more discernment, or we need to consider this further. Now, sometimes you'll get in a situation where it seems very self-serving and petty, the objection. And, I have been in meetings where a clerk ruled that, not ruled, but concluded that this was not a matter of principle that was important to the Society of Friends, but that the consensus could go forward even. You had to.
It's interesting because it's one of the things that's important about having everyone present, that when you get to the decision part of things, it's people's visual feedback that really matters as much as what they say. Ours was about, in Providence meeting, I was clerk, and ours was about same-sex marriage. And it was, I'm going to say 15 years ago. And there were two elderly people who hadn't really quite understood what we were saying and talking about, but they were weighty, longtime members of the meeting. And they were in the middle of the business meeting and were very surprised when they finally realized what we were talking about. And so we stopped, and in the interim between that meeting, we held it up until the next meeting, the decision. And different people went and talked with them so that there was a clearer sense of understanding about it. There was someone else who had been divorced but felt that the sanctity of marriage had he had a certain point of view about that, and in all three cases they did finally say that they understood, and they would not stand in the way of the decision. They would stand aside so that the decision could be made. But I think the thing that's so important in that case, and even just in the running of the meeting, is how the clerk is a listener. That practice of reading the group, knowing your group well enough to be able to sense agreement, because sometimes you can just see it in people's faces. It's very clear. So there are a lot of ways that, and actually also, it's sort of like being a good teacher. If someone hasn't said something, but you see them reacting in a certain way, you want to draw them out and see how they are feeling about it. And usually people in that situation are ready to express their feelings.
You might be about to explain it. So how does one become a clerk? And is it a duty that passes and that's shared? And that seems such an important role.
It is important. And of course, Rachel is stepping into the chair of the Moses Brown board. And, we did have last year a weighty Quaker from Philadelphia, Arthur Larrabee, who runs workshops on clerking and so on. He actually came and worked with the whole board. And
I think when I emailed the thing, I have a link to one of his videos, because you just can't capture him in just his writing. It's like he's such a presence.
But I think it was very helpful.
Very helpful. I did like so much to learn. I feel like it's one of these constants you have to work in. I sit in a lot of these meetings, and they're usually not clerked. They just aren't. Because everyone starts participating, and I think in the process of getting to a decision, yes, but there are things that go on, and you're like, somebody please clerk this meeting and get this back on track, or tell them that enough of these individual thoughts, it gets a little off track. But you have to be very conscious, I think, of a clerk. Of your
I'm going to risk adding an individual thought to say that in terms of the quality, it's I think implicit in what's been said, but wasn't stated specifically, that the clerk has no specific decision-making rule except in the process. At some point saying, seems to me that the sense of the meeting might be thus and such. But the clerk has no authority to proceed as the clerk. And in answer to your question as to how one becomes a clerk, I think a couple of people here who can speak more specifically to that. But George Orwell said all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And in friend meeting, there are some voices that carry more weight and authority and discernment and experience and judgment. And typically the clerk is one of those people, but when sitting as clerk, has to sort of renounce the role of taking a specific stance on an issue generally, and will actually sometimes step outside the clerk, let someone else clerk a meeting. But that's the other thing. The other piece that I would say here, in terms of people feeling clear about whether they can step aside and let the meeting go forward, is that there is an emphasis over time on people finding a balance between the importance of their expressing individual preferences, opinions, sometimes very strongly held opinions, and the corporate responsibility of not, there are so-called queries, sort of reminders about views that we might inspect in ourselves, and one of the elements of those is, are you taking part in meetings, and do you listen with an open and loving perspective to what other people bring? In other words, it's important to speak up for what you really believe, but then let other people.
Frequently, you would only speak once on a topic, and
they observed in the breach quite a bit.
And another thing that friends do is, if someone has said something that you really agree with, it's very common for a friend to say, "Friend speaks my mind," and then not make the comment themselves, so that it's clear to the group that they're joining in that unity, but they don't have to say it, as well. So.
And I think the other piece of that that's really important is that people are expected to speak to the group as opposed to responding to a specific.
That's hard to clerk,
and that's very it's very hard.
So all the comments should be to the clerk, who's the sort of hub of the group, and not Betsy and I getting into a sidebar argument,
which does happen, like any meeting.
Sure.
So.
I'm playing so many meetings in my mind in a lifetime that would have benefited from some of it.
Absolutely.
Like how hard it might be to keep this level of sophisticated interaction going now.
But if you get everybody to buy into it, and that's part of it. I mean, we have it built into the bylaws, actually in the bylaws themselves, including queries that we're guided by. It's in the board handbook, and we have trainings on Quaker, because it's a totally different way of conducting business, and getting everybody to do that. And we always need work at it.
Well, I tried to think of an example and thinking from the Moses Brown board, and I thought, the February meeting usually sets the budget. And so the budget, it would be inappropriate and relying a little too heavily on the Lord to say, we're just going to show up and the Lord will tell us what the budget's going to be for next year. So it doesn't work that way. But the committees, the financial officers worked at it, and the committees that worked at it. But I can the thing that came to mind was, it's conceivable that a member of the board would say, we've heard the report from the admissions office, and we're turning down some exceptional students who are very worthy. We just don't have the financial aid in order to be able to do that, and I'm wondering if we should up the tuition increase by 0.5% and put all that money toward financial aid. And that would be a legitimate thing to ask and to raise. And that might be where the clerk would be, it could be that a sense of the meeting would gather fairly quickly, or it could be that people were really divided about that, and someone's bound to say the finance committee's looked at it, we can't tamper with it, and then a member of the board might say, I feel important about this, and I think that it is a matter of principle, and I think it relates to our Quaker heritage, and I'd like for the board to consider further how do we meet this demand for scholarship that we want to respect. And then, again, the clerk has to sort of read the meeting, but it might be perfectly appropriate to say, I think we need more discernment on this, and I know it's important to set the tuition quickly, but would friends be willing to meet, in a special meeting in 2 weeks in order to, so that's a case of something coming up that people took seriously, and it was important that the group come together collectively on, and you might find yourself, sort of weighing that and discerning it.
And I think the thing that's interesting about those instances is, well, let me back up a little bit. The other piece about Quaker equality and truth-telling is the concept that the truth is never static, that it's always unfolding. So you can hear something different from somebody and, oh, well, that's worth thinking about. So sometimes, even though it feels as if perhaps getting to a deeper and better decision, and often that does seem to be what happens.
Yeah. And in terms of a meeting and having a subsequent meeting soon, another method I've seen used is sometimes to say, would friends be comfortable if this group of 3 people meets and comes to some decision about that? Would you be willing to accept as a corporate body the decision of those people?
Yeah, and that works.
Craig, one other, just to answer your sort of procedural question, it's like, I imagine other places, electing a chair of committees or something. We have a whole nominating committee and processes about, numbers and balance of all sorts of things. And then the discussions in the nominating committees themselves are very much like a Quaker decision-making. There's a whole process ahead of time soliciting names. It's very fluid, and some voices, people's names on the sort of possibility list will start to rise to the surface, and then sometimes during the meeting or towards the end, the clerk will say, my sense is we're looking to whittle down the list to these 6 people to be whatever it is you're looking for, clerks of committees or bringing onto the board, whatever it may be, and it kind of goes through that until you have a slate, but all that, and then that would officially go through the bylaws procedure to be presented, but it's like that would be the same corporate governance. It's just how you end up getting the names. So it's not just whoever gives the biggest donation, although stuff like that does get discussed in confidential meetings, but that's how we do it.
Now, those principles of diversity or inclusion, or like, as you say, some of the stuff, is there a mindset of like thinking about a broad set of stakeholders that
for balancing people?
Yes, for balancing people.
Yeah, I mean, every school is different. We may, as a committee or as a board, might say, as a directive, one of our goals for the year is to increase diversity on either X committees, or we want different gender, whatever the sort of directions are at the beginning of the year. So the nominated committee would have that in mind, so that they would establish in the beginning of the year what the goals are, kind of, and then that has discussions too. Gee, we think we really need business. It's a financial troubling time. Someone else may say, look, I'm really concerned about diversity. I'm not going to let this issue go until, and so there'll things like that. And then you do have to go make a call, and people will call for names. And then a good clerk will remind everyone as they're doing the discussions, and they do, and they'll say, just, as I'm getting a sense of the meeting for these 3 people, I want to bring people back to remember that we had decided as a goal or as a directive to increase whatever it is, education experience on the committee, and we haven't really talked about those people yet. So it's kind of keeping track of the goals, the back agenda, and keeping the board focused on, and again, that applies to whatever it is you're trying to make a decision on.
And all of this just underscores the importance of the clerk, and it's a real challenge. And, I was thinking about, what advice I would give a clerk.
I'll take it.
One is to prepare the agenda carefully and, have it out ahead of time. Because sometimes people can think of Quaker procedure as sloppy procedure, the Lord will take care of it. We don't have to do anything. But good preparation makes all the difference. So you want to know what you're coming to talk about and that. And I think the Moses Brown Board does that well, but that's an important step. The second thing is you always want to be very, in a Quaker setting, you always want to be very clear what you're asking the group to do. And there's a lot of places that have gotten into trouble because it wasn't clear whether the decision was to be made by the head of school and the board was simply being asked for advice, or was the board making the decision, or who was making the decision. And sometimes, I mean, I've walked into Quaker schools where there was sort of a everybody makes every decision. That's what Quakerism means. Everybody has a say. Everybody, the administration has no authority here. It's the faculty needs to approve everything that's happening. And a new head came into the school and was very. One of his gifts was to be very clear about, I'm asking your opinion about this, but I'm going to make the decision. And that was a new way of operating for that school, but it was, at some level people heaved a sigh of relief, finally there's some clarity and finally the decisions are getting made. So what are you asking of people? And again, the clerk articulates this, says, and the clerk may and has said, this is I want the board fully informed about this matter, but this is a matter for the administration of the school to handle. This isn't a matter for the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, in a school situation, that division really needs to be very clear. That there are certain, it can't all be by everybody's consensus, that there are certain schoolhouse things that are simply done that way. I think also when you are asking committees to report, as a clerk, you really need to make sure that the people who are reporting are clear about what you're asking them. That whole part of it, that as you prepare the agenda, just letting people know ahead of time how they are going to feed into this. And in many ways, if Quakerism works, Quaker decision-making really works well.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, Matt. Welcome.
Come in.
Hi. Come on, say hi.
Yeah, we'll get you on.
Triple booked at this time.
I know, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Are you online now?
Well, you're on your recording. You can say hi. This is Matt Glendenning. He's the head of school.
John, thank you for being here.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being here.
John and Betsy, thanks for coming down. Yeah. Great idea to have a session like this.
This is great. We're going to record it. It's super, super useful. Don, both of them are a treat, really.
So you're recording now and I'm interrupting your good time?
No, you're in it. You're part of it.
Not really.
Do something smart and full of wisdom for us.
Yeah, welcome to most of it.
I need about 24 hours to...
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for organizing it.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Thanks for hosting it.
Oh,
Yeah, really appreciate it.
all right, I'm running off to a gala now.
Oh,
okay.
So I'm going to steal one of these.
Take him in. Bye. Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Take care.
Yeah. One other thing that just some people interpret consensus decision making as everybody has a veto. If I don't like the decision, then I just say I don't, and that holds it up. And that's not the philosophy or the spirit of decision making with this. You're supposed to be part of the community, and you yourself are supposed to be weighing the community interest and not strictly your own interest. And then it's a real openness of the whole group trying to come together on this. And the clerk we've talked about lots of roles for the clerk, but the clerk does weigh the contributors to the discussion, and can sometimes influence it or evaluate it or the sense of the meeting may take into account the elder view more than the occasional attender kind of thing, but that happens. And then I was struck, Arthur Larrabee, when he says when it's working, when it really works, and it doesn't always work, but he said when it's really working, all of the members are brought together in some new place. And I think that's, so often when we think about our meetings, we think about, have I got control of this? Am I going to get this done? And, so on. He was saying you have to trust a bit here. And it may be divine, it may be sense of, spirit of the group, but all are brought together in a new place. And that's the ideal when it's working. I wanted to mention three cases I've been through. One was the North Carolina meeting, and I have to admit, Friends have two groups. There are programmed meetings that have a pastor and might have singing and a sermon and so on. Today, this is as it's evolved. And then there are unprogrammed meetings, which the Providence meeting is, and which many of the meetings in the East and Philadelphia, New York, Boston are in that tradition. And this was a North Carolina meeting that was unprogrammed but had a pastor who gave a homily every week. But then they had, like 40 minutes of silence. And they were building a new meeting house. And they built the wing with the multi-purpose room and the potluck space. But they couldn't agree on the meeting house. They wanted something special that would reflect both the programmed and unprogrammed tradition. And they discussed their meeting house for 20 years. And they met in the multi-purpose room and they continued to discuss it. Well, when I got there, the meeting house had been built. It was lovely. It worked beautifully. And people would come up to me as a newcomer and say, we were so smart not to rush this. We're just so glad that we waited for the right thing and this worked. So my point here is the process can take a little longer when you're discerning and listening and so on. It doesn't have to be 20 years, but if people really own the decision and like it, it was worth the wait. Kind of thing. The second case was we were revising the entire curriculum at Guilford College, and this included, the basic liberal arts that were required of all the students and so on. And we spent a year of the curriculum committee with distinguished, respected faculty coming in with proposals. And they were just, each one was shot down. It's not a good Quaker image here, but they weren't accepted, and people were very critical, and they were discouraged. So we asked the clerk of the committee, who was well respected, to work over the summer, to work with the faculty and see what we could do. And he sat down with each of the 70 faculty members for at least an hour's discussion of what they thought the needs and so on were in the thing. And he came back in the fall with a map of where we agreed. And then he had the side issues that we didn't agree on and we were really concerned about. But all of a sudden, as the committee would bring in changes, we never saw what we had in common, and we only saw our differences, and it made it seem like we were really, this was impossible. And he worked that year to grow the common area and to resolve the differences. And by spring, we had a plan. And I mean, this was serious stuff because there was a history requirement, and that's a lot of enrollments for history. And in the new plan, there was more choice, and there wasn't a required history course. And so you had to, bring people together on this. And he was able to do it by mapping the commonality and the togetherness, and then focusing on the differences and resolving those.
We need someone like that in Congress, I think, right?
Oh my
Wouldn't that work? I mean, finally.
It was just, it was amazing, and I just had such respect.
That's a great way.
But it was a key, but because it was Quaker procedure, we had to come to a sense of the meeting on this. And when we finally took the action, it was such a letdown because we've been working all this time, but things have been worked out and people were comfortable with it.
And is the idea of that mapping like a Quaker concept, or was that someone innovating within like a framework?
I would say he was innovating, but the idea of what do we have, what does the community value and what do we have in common would be very consistent with Quaker efforts. The other was around the gay and lesbian issue. I was on the board of trustees of a college, and the members, religious friends, were divided. And this is in the 70s, so things hadn't changed quite as much as they have now. And some of the friends, more evangelical friends, said, we just, from our reading of the Bible, this is not right, and we should not, the college should not be supporting and assisting gay, lesbian student organizations and so on. And it was one of those times when, I was dreading this meeting because I really felt that they could walk out, or those yearly meetings could withdraw from the college, and the board could be severely divided and so on. And it was a Quaker, it operated by Quaker process, and it started with the people from the meetings that were very upset with the college and thought that we should not be supporting gay and lesbian students. And they articulated their position, but they never said, and we demand that the board do this or that. And they, so that I think they felt that they had shared their position, but they hadn't insisted that their position be adopted. And we went around the room with people, each board member spoke, and one of the last board members said, my son died of AIDS, and because of society's attitude toward gays and AIDS, he never felt he could tell us what was going on in his life. And she said, because of society's attitudes and the way people treated him, I have to live every day of my life knowing that he died without any support from us because of that. And the meeting, the meeting concluded in silence, and nothing was acted on. There was no attempted sense of meeting, but just we all knew that had been a very profound meeting, and that we've been able to be honest with each other, and that the college would be supporting gay and lesbian students, and we would not be discussing this again. And it just, again, it was one of those times when you think the spirit was really there, and it came out okay.
It actually continues to be an issue of unity in New England yearly meetings, a lack of unity. New England yearly meeting supports Friends United meeting, which is the programmed national group, and they are they're very conservative. They also have a big missionary contingent in Africa and do a lot of different things there, and some of their feeling comes out of dealing with Muslim communities and other communities there. But for New England Yearly Meeting, to make a contribution, we yearly decide how much. They finally have worked out a system where each monthly meeting who makes the contribution to the yearly meeting can decide whether their share of that contribution will actually go to Friends United meeting, or they will, the local meeting will choose another venue to send the money to, and New England Yearly Meeting will accommodate that. And it's been after some local meetings have actually had splinter groups, and historically Quakers haven't always been terribly good at following their own rules about unity, but it's really been a struggle between people who say, I just can't stand for this, I don't want to have anything to do, and people who say we need to continue talking and working on a decision.
To that end, I was just going to say, could you talk a little bit on the other side about the role of a participant, right? And that could be anything from you agree to go into the meeting, you agree to speak your voice, you agree to listen, and then also if after there's been a sense of the meeting afterwards, so you don't. Have you seen it help in sort of maybe non-Quaker or Quaker institutions where you don't have the sort of bickering or, people side, trying to cut something down afterwards?
Well, I tried to jot down, I said, how could this work in a business setting? And I said, of course, first, you don't have the religious aspect. It's a secular effort. But I don't think, for me, that doesn't rule it out. You're appealing to unity or a spirit of the group or a shared commitment to the thing. You're not appealing to God, but there's a sense of we want to do this well and get it right. So I tried to say,
and I would say companies. My wife worked at Nike. There are godlike, there are cultures are so strong in these companies. It's not so different. Believe me.
Okay.
So there might never be
the spirit of Nike come forward.
Parallels than you think in some of these intensely strong corporate cultures. But please go on.
Okay. So I said I think if businesses use Quaker, some of the Quaker concepts, they can produce more what I call robust decisions, better decisions, and basically it's. You're bringing everybody in, so you're getting all the creativity you can, and there's some research that shows that having women and diversity in on decisions, you get better decisions and make more money than if you exclude people who are just some white males running this operation. I think, and secondly, we've all been in situations where we got a 60-40 vote in favor of the plan, and so we go with the plan, and then we spend the next year trying to convince the 40% to go along with the plan. So you may get the decision quicker because you've got the majority, but the decision may not be as effective because you're spending a lot of time convincing people to go along with it. Whereas in the Quaker process, you do it the other way. You have the discussion and bringing people on board and engaging them before you take the decision. And then usually when you get the sense of the meeting and agree that, so the clerk then says what it is and then say, do friends approve? And friends tend to say approve. And then, people are on board for the decision rather than...
I'm on another board and I'm the chair of a committee, and I've sort of boiled it down to 4 or 5 things that I ask at the beginning of each year and then halfway through the year. So I start by saying, please wait to be recognized. Please say what you want to say and then wait until other people have spoken. I don't always say everybody, but
Yeah.
I often do, in the process of listening, make sure that everybody has spoken. And now I'm going to forget one of them, I'm sure. And then I ask that if people have spoken once on a certain topic, then try not to repeat what they have said, and try to be concise. Try to pull it down that way, because that's often the big thing. And then to speak to the group rather than speaking to individuals, because that becomes huge. And in the years I've been doing it, just sort of not ever saying this comes from
Quaker,
somewhere else, or saying the word Quaker, people have gotten used to talking to each other that way. And people keep telling me I run a great meeting, but oh no, I can't take credit for this.
Yeah.
But as long as you get that basic civility, really, it's like, really, that's the underpinning of Robert's Rules of Order too, so that you can be heading towards a vote. But if you can get to a certain amount of agreement first, then you don't have to vote in a way, or you vote and the conclusion.
John, you had something before, yeah.
I was going to say, I think it's important to get people to speak as well to the agenda. I believe it's really very valuable to have an agenda, and an agenda that's clear to people. Many years ago in Philadelphia, there was a group called Movement for a New Society, and they structured meetings so that the first 5 minutes, and this is not a Quaker piece, but it's a Quaker sympathetic piece. The first 5 minutes of the meeting were used so that everybody had a voice in setting the agenda, and then everyone in the room knew what was in that agenda. And it would give people a sense of the flow, and I think it was very helpful. For the non-friends the non-Quakers listening to this, Betsy mentioned the yearly meeting. Yearly meeting is both an event and is a geographical and administrative concept. And then the other thing, I think it's important to say from what Don was saying, that people will often not need from a meeting what you think they will need, or perhaps what they think that they will need. And their experience of being heard or being included in a minute, or that their point of view is included and recognized, and even recognized on paper, even if it's not the largest outcome, can meet their needs, and that may help them to really buy into the whole process, and to get out of the way.
Yeah, Betsy, you had something.
I was just thinking that explaining that a little bit more would be useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the concepts I thought of for non-Quaker was you approach the meeting with openness. And so often, I've found myself going to meetings saying, I've got 3 votes, I need 2 more. What do I need to say to those people in order to get them on board? And that is not openness. That is not, seeking the best solution. That's not. So a part of the Quaker effort is approach the meeting with openness, that you're willing to listen to other views and so on. Second, participants equal. We've talked about that, and that's important. The process is one of seeking and listening, and that's I think Betsy mentioned that, people change their minds. People are, new ideas come when you hear what somebody else said. And so, Quakers are big on, you can't send in your vote because it's a collective effort, and if you're not there to hear what's being said, then you can't have a vote recorded, that kind of thing. So there's a real sense of seeking and listening and trying to understand more. And the goal was to come together around the best decision that you can come up with, and that's in the end, you hope that there'll be a sense of the meeting that people can unite behind and feel that they've been heard and feel that they own it and feel that this is good for the company or good for the organization. And I think all of those are sort of come out of that Quaker thing, fit into a secular setting, and I think will make for better decisions that you can, whether it's a school, a board of trustees, or a Nike board or group, if people are doing this, that this will be helpful. And then I call them robust decisions because people, we've been open to the creativity of everybody. We weren't getting rid of, you're not important, so we don't want to hear what you think, kind of thing. And then the decision is owned by everybody because everybody's been part of it. And it wasn't a vote. You're not leaving the meeting with winners and losers. Hopefully you're leaving the meeting with everybody together. And I think it feeds into the corporate sense of community, whether it's a company or a school board. If you get good decisions, it strengthens your working together and your support for the head and your future options, things that you can do, so that it really is helpful. I was intrigued that I tried to find that this had been written about. I was looking for a Harvard case study, but didn't find that.
It's funny. I was looking, too, to see there really isn't much written out there.
But Forbes magazine in 2009 had an article, Doing Business the Quaker Way, and they said, given the poor quality decisions emerging from corporate conference rooms today, a revival of Quaker methods may be long overdue. So I took that as our timely discussion tonight, and that there have been some crossover in the business world to the Quaker world, and I think it can be useful, and it's an art, not a science, but I think that it's an attitude toward making the decisions that are helpful. So
it's terrific. Thank you. Craig, those are sort of non-Quaker. You have other questions about applications and letter?
Well, I guess the question first is, because we're here at Moses Brown, like, to what degree is this being taught in the school, and how do young people interact with these sets of ideas? I'm so curious how people think, or is it more of just the administration of the institution?
No, I think the students Betsy, you taught here, right?
Yeah. It's been an evolving process, but I think it's really embedded in the way children learn first, that each day from the youngest children, and I think this is a fairly common practice now, but Moses Brown's been doing it for 40 years. So they go around a circle and ask each child to either say something about their day, yesterday, or greet the child next to them in a certain way. So the idea of being inclusive and working in that group begins to be nurtured from the very, very beginning. And then by the time they get to upper school, the discipline committee is really, well, this is an interesting place where there are certain schoolhouse things that there are times when certain things you just, there's ground zero. But for issues,
like allegations of cheating. I'm sure most schools
cheating.
have a disciplinary committee or something where rather than just being suspended, you go before it.
Cheating is a good example. That there will be students and teachers on this discipline committee, and so your peers are judging you as well as the faculty. And it's interesting because often the kids are the tougher ones on that, but I think they really do develop a sense of equality very, very quickly, so that it sort of grows out of that.
And I can say here, and as with all Quaker schools, they do respect the tradition of meetings for worship, silent meetings, and it could be everything from monthly, or I went to schools in Philadelphia, it was weekly. They use it for all school gatherings, whatever, and they get this, so living with silence times, that's part of their experience. They start classes, they start meetings, so the kids start to, and I can tell you from my own experience, and you've met others, that once you leave, you don't have that time for reflection, however you do it, but even within your work day or business day, which is why people are turning now to meditation and yoga, all sorts of stuff. It's that sort of centering. So the kids get used to that. Teachers are called by their first names because, again, it's a sort of everyone's equal. Equality. There are practices they do, like heartness and discernments, and a lot of things where the teacher will have the students lead things. And so whether they're told, this is from the Quaker tradition of X, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but I think it's very embedded into the culture, and then they hopefully take that with them into their days and as adults.
It's so interesting. The corporate culture at Amazon, I think it's a Quaker mindset, but many meetings have a lot of silence in them. People read memos. Sometimes they'll go senior executives. Like, there's a brief for the meeting, 15 or 20 minutes of absolute silence as people are digesting information, and then people talk. So it's not silence in the sense of, but it's off-putting to outsiders. We used to walk into meetings and solving stuff. It's like, no, you're going to digest all this material. It's quite interesting that it really is, that's coming from the top.
One of the things that's interesting here, if a student starts in lower school, they get used to, 5 to 15 minutes of silence at the beginning of the day, but then every week they have a half-hour meeting for worship. So at middle school and then at upper school, there's this huge influx of new, well, not huge, but influx of new students. And the kids that have grown up with it are really quite comfortable with it. And the other kids often are saying, why am I wasting my time? What? I could be studying now. And, they don't quite understand the value of this block of time where nobody is telling you what to think. You don't have to do something. So as they get used to that, it's really an interesting process to watch when they begin to find their voice in meeting for worship. And the little ones, it often happens around vacations, and there'll be 6 people who, I'm da-da-da-da-da-da, and I hope everybody has a great vacation, and they'll, and
just so you know, Craig, the process is that there's no pulpit, there's nothing, it's everyone sits on the floor, and that's everybody. It's pretty amazing to walk into the field house and see like 600 kids sitting quietly, and there's no agenda, so it's meant to be, if you feel moved to talk or about, sometimes I think there are assignments ahead of time, like somebody may meant to read a poem, but I've been in ones where someone got up and just sang. I had no idea this person had a saying, or they might read a poem, or they might reveal something very personal. And it's like being in a giant shrink's office in some ways, because you're there to listen and respect it, and everybody comes out of there very differently. But you see, you're right, the little ones might get up just because they're trying this, right? I wanted to say I'm thankful for the flowers today or something. And then as you get older, you'll have, like, high school students will say, if there's been a particularly, like this happens all the time, where there's been, a party, and there's been drinking, someone got arrested, there was a disciplinary, all sorts of stuff, and the whole school comes together, that they may use that as an opportunity to get up and reflect how they're feeling. And the whole school, like all upper school, 400 and 500 of their peers will listen to each other.
Yeah.
And frequently, alumni of friend schools will point to the silent meeting as an important part of that. And it came up in the Super Bowl this year, where
that's right.
They back for the Atlanta team.
Had gone to Penn Charter.
Penn Charter.
Yeah.
And the Times ran a whole piece about how he was more of a team player and less of a braggart. Because they gave the friends credit for that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems from the conversation that a lot of what you're doing and talking about is decisions that affect your group. How about thinking externally? Like, this is a time in which equality is being questioned. A lot of the clients I work with are focused on issues of racial justice and are quite fired up about some of these issues in society. Is there an activist streak or a thread that inspires even today folks to go off and try to protect some of these values in a more universal way versus just in your community, this division between Quaker and secular?
Yeah.
You would have said, yes, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Keep it on the board. Well, I'll just say the beginning part. There's a group called the American Friends Service Committee that has been in existence since World War I, and they received the Nobel Peace Prize after World War II for their relief work. And they are probably the biggest activist group, but there's also a group called Friends Committee on National Legislation.
Yeah.
And
there's a very strong activist advocacy tradition in the Friends, and part of it related to their pacifism. And the American Friends Service Committee started when Friends said they could not serve in the military in World War I, but they went to France to drive ambulances and be part of the medical support there. And they've continued in their sort of advocacy and relief work, both internally and internationally. SDNL is a lobbying group, and Friends Committee on National Legislation, and they encourage people from schools. Students from Moses Brown have gone down to, sort of teach them a bit about lobbying, and then they arrange appointments with their congressmen and their senators, and so they're very much a part of it.
yeah, there's actually an intern program in Geneva. That's SCNL, isn't it?
No, I think it's AFSC, maybe Quaker UN office.
Oh, yes, Quaker UN office, yeah. And students can go for a month, I think, and spend time there working on that. And there's a house in New York City near the UN.
Mm-hmm. Just we talked a little earlier. I was on the advisory committee to the Quaker UN office, and when the UN was founded, the Quakers raised money, including gifts from the Rockefellers, to buy a townhouse at the corner of 2nd Avenue and 48th Street. And it has a large living room, and they do off-site informal conversations, and they invite delegates to come, and they may have somebody from Burundi who's in New York who's been a victim of some of the violence there, and they'll invite ambassadors to come to tea and hear about what's going on the ground and so on. So they've been very active there. So they're.
Are you asking about like maybe the applying the tradition, how could that help guide people who are interested or solving some of these societal issues?
I guess there's a question like how relevant today. You know, you mentioned some big numbers for other religions, and so I'm somewhat aware of the past history with schism and wars and stuff, and here we are in the moment during which progressive values are under the largest assault in a long time, not just in this country but around the world. So, what are Quakers doing today about some of this stuff? Yeah.
One of the things that Providence Meeting has started doing was first getting to know the Muslim community here in Rhode Island when the refugee crisis just exploded. And that started with, first someone came and we had a potluck dinner and he gave a program about Islam, and then one of the women in meeting got to know a group called A Hope Rhode Island, which has been helping refugees to get settled. So we decided with the first day school, the Sunday school for children, that we would begin a collection, which we did for February and March. And we took loads of things to that group, and we stopped for a while, but my guess is we'll start again in the fall. And then the other thing that members of the meeting are doing once a month, on a Friday, we go to a mosque somewhere in Rhode Island, and we take coffee and cookies so that when people come out after their services, we're there to greet them. And we just hold up signs and say, we support you, we're your friends. And so those kinds of things tend to be what can happen with a small meeting community. Sometimes what happens, though, is that a meeting community can't agree, and people are going in their own directions, too. So there'll be small pockets of things happening that comes out of the community.
Another tradition is of a meeting supporting an individual going off and doing something as well. And, but as with so many communities these days, we struggle with what do we do? There was a request for sort of a statement of solidarity with the Muslim community and the asylum seekers, and this process was followed. I think that everybody came out of the meeting with some comfort with it, although I suspect that I know that there were those people who felt that a more forward-moving, active outcome would have been valuable, particularly with regard to whether the meeting would be have asylum status.
Sanctuary.
It may be an asylum, but it. No, thank you, Betsy. But it's a group of people who have many strong and diverse opinions, and there are those people who would push harder. Despite, for instance, the peace testimonies, which many of us feel are really fundamental, there are Quakers who served in American military in all different eras because they felt that circumstances call for it in one way or another. So there is quite a bit of diversity, and while we're as a whole a pretty liberal group, we probably could be more open-armed to those of us who don't agree with us, and
And
It's a very white group. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. I've come to feel that the schools and colleges that the Quakers founded are performing a very important service in maintaining the values and the traditions and sharing them broadly with non-Quakers, because there are a lot of people who go to Quaker schools who never consider joining, becoming a friend, but they talk frequently about what the silent meeting meant, or what the emphasis on peace meant, or what those Quaker values meant in their education. And so I don't think we'll ever catch the Catholics in numbers of members, but I do think that we share the values in very important ways through schools. And I think that's one of the things that I've been very impressed with the board here at Moses Brown is Quaker and non-Quaker alike value the Quaker heritage and the Quaker tradition, and I think try very conscientiously to assure that continues and is infused into the life of the school.
And I think because Quaker schools really represent a dichotomy between wealthy families seeking this good education and people who, I mean, lots of times faculty are here because they want their children to have this education too, that dialogue keeps growing and sort of keeps pushing the standards to the forefront. So even though the school is often not totally Quaker in its being, it's always sort of grappling with how it is Quaker. And that's really healthy.
It's a very interesting process. And I'm sure individuals have the same grappling, right? As intersect with.
Am I living a simple life?
So I'm just because we're at our time, and I'm not sure how long, so I'm going to just hit the end of recording here, and then we can